vote Matt. Let's go.
Okay.
I can do anything but the reporter or the recorder or.
Order and take the notes.
I also cannot do that.
I can work on taking notes for
I think you should.
I can be our timekeeper. But let me open up my laptop because I know I'll need to do that. You know that.
Thank
Quite an
you.
AI opportunity. It's sort of funny that we're not actually just utilizing a tool that would actually be taking the notes and then one could actually edit down the notes.
GPT.
Oh my gosh, I didn't realize that was your laptop. I was like, okay, go get it.
Maybe that's next time.
It's your, I thought it was a, it's getting old and earlier I was working and it fell off.
It is cute.
You still have to
Yeah.
knock
You
it
still
down
have to- Right.
time,
It's
but-
still gonna-
All right.
give us something more than,
Okay.
but okay, we got Juliet, you're in.
All right.
But we have Julia. Everything is
Wait,
okay.
I'm sorry, Julie, who's Julie?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about someone up there. I was like, huh? Okay, sorry. I'm sorry. Thank you. Heidi.
Matt, what are we doing next?
Okay, so, all right, Matt, facilitate, please. I'm ready for you. Wait, I said I was gonna be timekeeper, so you tell me how many minutes to put on the clock.
I think facilitator is not like supreme all-seeing.
Oh.
being.
We're giving you respect.
I am not like, I'm not emperor or anything. I am just here to help us move the work along. It seems like one of the things we need to do is look for, I guess, themes that are emerging between some of these.
Yep.
So I don't know if that would be a good place to start, is just to see if there's some things we might be able to lump or chunk or.
Yes.
Um,
Okay, can I start with the first one? 'Cause I think it coincided with something else on here. It's that first one was 1.65. It's receive feedback in a timely manner. And that also goes along with, there was like 1.1, I'm sorry, I'm going by the numbers on the side. TPA feedback is provided within 2 weeks of submission, right? Because it's timely, and then now it's saying 2 weeks, right? Timely, 2 weeks.
Is there, sorry, Julia, so I know how a TPA works, I don't know how your FAST works,
Yeah.
so with like a TPA, it says submit on this date, you get your feedback on this date, and it's always held to that, is there like a given, like we're giving feedback on this date always, or is it a more moving target?
It's a little bit looser than that. I mean, there's a definite deadline. And we try to get feedback within 1 to 2 weeks.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
yeah. So it is within the 2 week span. then?
Yeah, typically.
Typically, okay. So then to ask the other two, right, Ed TPAs and Cal TPAs for a 2 week turnaround?
Is it
Would be-
feasible?
Yeah, is it feasible? Because right now, what is it at right now? I think it's-
3.
It
No,
varies.
there's a time span. If you submit it in this window,
Here's a window
and
and
then
then
the grades will
there's
be,
the
and I
window.
want to say it's closer to 2 months.
Oh, well, what's
Is it
the window is not 2 months, it's
No.
usually within the month, if you submit it like in the beginning of
Oh,
April, you get it by the end of April, yeah, it's on there, so that would be a good
No,
place
no.
to start. But I mean, I guess
That's interesting because what they're sending to the commission next week says that it's a 3-week turnaround.
It is.
which might be,
I
but
don't know.
if,
Well, you're
from the deadline, from the submission deadline
Yeah.
to the score reporting, if you submit way before the deadline, then I would
It
say.
is, it is about 3 weeks, because I'm looking at it right now, so like October 5th, 2023, you'd get your score by October 26th. So it is about 3 weeks.
I don't think there can be a rolling 2 week window, like anytime you submit is the 2 week window starts. I don't know how.
Okay,
But I would also add too, sorry, go ahead, Brent.
Actually, can I zoom out a little bit?
Yeah.
You guys were at the last meeting together, so maybe you're more zoomed in. I just want to zoom out really quickly and ask a question that I think was implicit in the meeting that I was in, and I think is still the spirit of formative in nature. It's not so much about when the deadline is only, I think that's the key issue. It's also an issue about what the ongoing process for formative feedback is.
Yeah.
To make this a instrument that has the ability to allow student teachers and their mentors to engage in conversations about how to improve work over time. So if it's a 3-month cycle or a 6-month cycle or 2-year cycle, the cycle shouldn't be what's going on at the end. It should be what's going on at the beginning, middle, and end. And so I just want to zoom back out a little bit and say, what I don't see from these recommendations, unfortunately, and I appreciate Adam's allowing us to kind of come back at this again iteratively. I would just like to see more about what it would mean to think about within cycles.
I think some of that comes up in focus area 2.
Does it?
If you
So
look
I
at
will
like
kick
the
it forward to that. I don't have,
scaffolding and sequencing tasks,
yeah.
I think it's there, and I feel like there's a lot of blurriness between the two areas.
Yeah, there seems to
But-
be.
So what I would say is then
Here.
I'm settled because I know that we'll get to that tomorrow.
Yeah, like I'm gonna. You don't have the packet.
I have it.
TPA tasks should be broken into smaller parts. These parts could be assignments completed as part of required coursework. Candidates will receive feedback on submitted assignments. Then they'd have the opportunity to revise that assignment based on the feedback, provide written oral documentation of the revised assignment, submit the revision as part of the official
That
submission.
makes it formative, right?
That makes it
So that's
Yeah,
nice.
but that's,
Connected.
yeah, but
Great. Then let's keep going on the conversation, Matt, that we've been leading around. What are we doing around the timing of deadlines? and
Well,
what-
I was
coming
gonna more or
back?
less say the same thing. I mean, I was just gonna add that I don't really think the deadline matters if you don't do anything
thing
with
with
it.
it, exactly.
If you just get it just to know that you passed, then that's not formative, and it doesn't matter if that's 2 weeks, 1 week, or
Okay.
24
I'm
hours.
I'm just stating it based on this, that's exactly it. So I'm saying that 1.1 says feedback provided within 2 weeks of submission. I think we can, right now it's at 3 weeks, so 2 weeks, 3 weeks, that shouldn't really matter. So can we cross out that one? Because,
Well, we don't wanna, I think.
not cross out, but consolidate it somewhere else. I'm just saying that one's kind of irrelevant.
Well, so maybe
Compared to
what we
one
can
point
do is in this formative value, we can kind of find the themes that are emerging, and feedback clearly seems to be one.
And I would even break that theme out. So I'm almost halfway. I've been doing that recommendation. I'm seeing timeliness, but also in that first one, it also captures ongoing development as a theme. So something that's like more than just a blanket. You see what I'm saying? More than just the blanket rubric for feedback, but some actual feedback.
Yeah.
I'm seeing chunking as a theme that emerged in the third one.
That's one, what is this, 1.35?
Yeah.
There's a bunch of 1 point.
Which one?
Yeah.
Yeah, there is, but that's the only way I can, it's basically chunking and determining these are the most important standards for teachers, right? Like to assess.
Are you looking at the
1 point,
streamline?
yeah, that one,
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah. Unless if I'm misreading it.
I think the chunking is a little more nuanced than that, because I think the purpose of the chunking is to have kind of that intermittent feedback,
Yeah.
right?
It's a
Agreed.
iterative process.
Yes.
I agree. I would think if you're chunking the assessment, you would figure out what are we chunking? Let's make sure these are the standards you know what I mean? It would be
Yeah.
a rehaul. This, to his point in there, this is talking about a rehaul of what is being assessed.
Mhm.
Right? So
Yeah.
you're right, it is past chunking. It's chunking and making sure we're purposeful about what we are chunking.
Making, yeah, purposeful chunks.
Yeah.
I just did a quick.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm confused with the chunking. What are we chunking?
So you know how like on the TPA, when you did the Cal TPA, so when you did the Cal TPA, it's like for cycle 1, you filmed yourself introducing a lesson with
So
a
you're
learning
talking about the
target.
actual assessment.
So
of
like,
those
let's
chunks. Okay.
instead of doing one turn-in with like 100 pages of document, 40 pages of documents
Yeah.
and multiple videos and
And
why don't
18
we,
rubrics,
right, and
right?
let's look at one rubric that can be handled for this one element of teaching and get that submission in for $5 or whatever, you know?
You get some feedback on that.
Yes, and actual feedback, and like the thing is, it doesn't take long to grade.
I appreciated, because I was leaning that way too. I appreciated, I think it was Tina who mentioned last time that, and just food for thought maybe, is that that's not
Real life.
the whole, right.
Yeah.
I mean, teachers don't just write a lesson plan and then go away and get a score back
Right.
from it. It's gonna be implemented, and hopefully they're assessing the results of that and then making decisions about what happens next. And so when you compartmentalize these things, then in a way, it's making it less authentic of a.
I agree. I also think though, like my counter to that would be right now it's 3 clips that you can pull throughout the course of a lesson that's not giving you a full scope picture, could be over multiple days depending on the cycle. So it's replicating the inauthenticity of the assessment as it currently stands. I agree though, like we need to have
Can you maybe say that a different way? I didn't.
Yeah. And again, I only know Cal TPA.
Yeah.
But speaking in terms of Cal TPA, what you would submit is a clip from the beginning, a clip of student working, a clip of the end. That is what you submit,
Okay.
along with like aligned documentation.
Yeah.
And so with that in mind, it's already chunked in terms of its mindset, but what's happening is you can select what you want to submit, and you can even prep or prime your course technically before. So like currently is, all I'm saying is like the way it's currently designed is actually designed for that, so it's just making it less overwhelming for people.
Sure.
But I agree, like if you're actually looking at the nature of teaching, you need a full scope. So I don't have a solution.
I think another
guys, yeah.
Yeah, so again, I think we need to go iteratively, like there's this list in front of us, and I think we're supposed to be task driven in this process, and we're supposed to somehow come up with from this list something. What was the thing we're supposed to come up with again?
Recommendations.
Recommendation. So does that mean we consolidate, as we heard, sort of like consolidating recommendations, or do we just treat it, can we continue to talk about what these sentences mean?
We would come up with, my understanding is we come up with a couple sentences, one of which would be the RDI TPA work group recommends that blank.
Yep, okay.
And then the second would be the recommendation is necessary because of blank.
So that's sort of like where we're heading.
Yes.
Before we jump to that yet, I just want to go back to this question of like working through what these recommendations mean. First of all, they were very broad statements. They were generated from our group. We did a Likert scale ranking. We said we like this, we don't like this. Here's our list. I think one that's really interesting for me was that streamline the TPA, that's maybe the chunking thing, by reviewing and condensing its components to focus on. Now, here's what mattered to me, not that other stuff. Key teaching practices. Now, this is the contested part. Because really,
But I'm sorry, which
having,
one are you looking at, Brent?
The third one.
third one?
Okay, still the third one, what's 1.35, okay.
Yeah, but
sorry.
again, focusing on the word key teaching practices. So there's an interesting challenge here. This goes back to the construct definition. I worked on Cal TPA design. We talked a lot about the idea of what is it we're trying to measure? What are we trying to assess here? Planning, enacting, reflecting. There's a cycle on the Cal TPA design. It's the argument that you're planning and you're showing your evidence that you can do that. You're enacting through your video performance, and then you are reflecting on both documents and video. Again, the idea is it was meant to measure those dispositions and skills. None of this is being talked about, which is really strange. It's so disconnected from the theory of action for the instrument. The instrument, the Cal TPA, already was thinking and designed to have candidates think about planning, enacting, reflecting. The other issue that I see going on with defining key teaching practices is even if you were to do that work and think, well, what's the planning evidence? What's the enacting evidence? What's the reflecting evidence? You might also worry about, well, what's all that alignment with all those 7, 8 standards? So then you get that shotgun problem. You're trying to get candidates to write about everything and write about everything, maybe not so deeply or so well. What would it mean for us to identify key teaching practices? My question. That anyone could agree on are the basis for redesign or for recommendations for how to better target Cal TPA or FAST. Do we just leave this statement as, even though it was popularly endorsed by our entire group, a statement that still doesn't make sense because we don't know what they meant by key?
No, I think we have to clarify it.
We have to clarify that.
That's our job right here.
Okay, so we are here to
Have
talk.
to take this verbatim.
Okay.
This is just for us to think through or to guide our thinking and guide our creation of the
So
recommendation.
I'll float a thought experiment on if I was asked, and I was king for a day because Matt said you can be king and emperor for a day. What are some key teaching practices that I want to know about California beginning teachers, actually not beginning teachers, pre-service teachers? I would want to know that they can use questioning strategies well in the classroom. That is their dialogue. They're people who ask questions to students. They're not people who come into class and don't ask questions. That's baseline. And there's a lot of good research to support that with the formative assessment literature. So just questioning strategies. There's an example of a very narrow, very clear, very well-defined space that's research-based, but it's too narrow because it doesn't align with the 7 standards that are asking teachers to do all these things. So I'm just putting this as a thought experiment problem. No matter how much we talk about teaching practices, they're always going to look a little too narrow. And no matter how much we talk about standards, they're always going to look like a bunch of checklists that don't really match with what people do in the classroom. So I'm just struggling again with what is our charge to talk about formative value if we have trouble even defining what we think would be the most basic things our beginning pre-service teachers should be able to know and do in a classroom.
Agree with you, Brent, but I
Now
think,
stop.
no, I'm just thinking like based on what, I forgot who said it in our other room, but the actual TPA themselves, the actual assessment. And I think when you're talking right now about key teaching practices, you're going into the actual assessment, which is what we're doing tomorrow.
Okay,
Because we do need to look at the actual questions and the key teaching practices that are being addressed in the actual TPA itself, and that's tomorrow's task. I guess right now, I want to go back to what Ben was saying. I'm just looking at this, trying to do what we're doing right now, which is condensing or,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so, and that's why I'm looking at things like the timeliness, like just trying to, cluster them. And if we're looking at timeliness and on the word ongoing development, and see if I'm understanding this correctly, because I'm agreeing with you, Ben, Matt, and everybody else, that are we agreeing or have a consensus that we do want to see the TPAs in multiple, right here, where it says aligning multiple TPAs within fewer and more purposeful sections. So are we saying submitting not just one big one, but submitting maybe 4 of them in 4 different timelines? Am I understanding that correctly?
That's that's honestly more probably focus area 2, I would argue, when I'm thinking
Okay.
about like the structure. So like in terms of just formative, right? Timely, based on ongoing development, focused feedback is another way of saying that. Purposeful assessment, like something that's like purposeful. Something about revision and resubmission is in 3 different boxes.
Right.
Something about AI tools is in 2 boxes. That covers everything in some way, shape, or form, unless if I'm missing something, please fact check. Other than the whole online platform currently in use and identify opportunities to improve accessibility and usability, because I don't know what that has to do with formative.
it could.
Okay,
And I'm gonna be super annoying.
yeah,
Could you repeat those?
yeah, the
I-
5,
Timeliness,
I got, yeah, timeliness,
ongoing development,
yep.
purpose
Purpose,
feedback,
yep,
I liked
Revision.
substantive when you were
And
calling it that earlier.
I'm gonna say focused and substantive feedback.
and then revision and resubmission.
and then there's technically something about AI tools, the last 2 boxes are both.
Yeah, we can bracket that for 2 seconds,
I also have,
maybe.
and maybe I missed, chunking to allow for intermediate.
I think it belongs more in tomorrow's.
That's past
Because
design.
this is about formative and that's more about the
Too though.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I agree with you. So I think
Yeah.
that's formative.
CASP
Well,
is summative.
I guess
So
my question is, if we're breaking it up, there's a reason why we're breaking it up. Other than that, what's the difference of submitting it in November versus submitting it in like December? You know what I mean? But if we're submitting it in parts, the reason why I think it should be broken up into parts is because of this feedback piece. Like if you submit in November just a portion of it, then you're getting a feedback by the end of November so that you can resubmit.
Yes.
Right? So that's, and then, and when you're doing that, instead of just one big submission and here's the 20 things you did wrong, resubmit. you're
Technically,
doing it in
that's-
Pieces. And
That's
then,
called interim assessment. So instead of a summative or formative distinction, you actually could throw in the notes some kind of interim process-based assessment so that the system would do exactly what you heard.
Well, but it sounds like, I mean, ultimately, the goal is, if I'm hearing you right, is you just want people to get some feedback and be able to use that for improvement.
right, I think an opportunity to resubmit, I think is the huge one for me, is that once you don't pass, it even says it on there, you're, at least for the Ed TPA, that you're not supposed to submit the same one. They don't want you to submit the same, they want to have something completely different. Yeah, so what I'm saying is,
Start over.
if
you
you,
have to start over.
yeah, you have to start over. So I'm saying is, if you don't have a passing score on your first submission, and let's just say, based on their scale and rubric, you're off by 3 points,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
whatever those little sections are. If you got feedback on those sections and you redid it, I think that's what teaching is. It's about redoing those little sections and refining it rather than, okay, we failed this whole thing, so now we're gonna redo this whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, that sounds all well and good, but if we're talking about your video of teaching a topic and the feedback comes back not positive, you can't,
Just teach the same topic again.
yeah.
Yeah, I understand what you mean.
No, you do have to start over.
Well, and actually technically for it to be formative, you would have to give an opportunity to learn and reteach. So yes, you would have to have this teacher reenact. I mean, it's like, why are we shocked? That would be exactly what you have to do. You learn that it didn't go well. Now you got to learn how to make it go better. You go do it again. Now you resubmit. But do you resubmit as a whole package or do you resubmit that chunk?
Right.
Because if you chunked it, you could argue again, I'll go back to the design principles that, a good thing that Mary's here now. For the Cal TPA at least, we really did talk about planning, enacting, reflecting.
Yeah.
And so if one was to say, I have to not do my planning, I'm good at planning, check. I'm okay at reflecting, but my enaction needs some work. In other words, the video I submit to show my teaching is not dialogic. I'm up there with my back turned to everybody. I'm basically not paying attention to anything that's going on in the classroom. I mean, I go back to like, what are we trying to evaluate in every TPA? I thought it was planning skills, enacting skill. You know what I mean by enacting, right? That's the video. Like, how else do I know you enact unless I observe you or I put a video on you? One of the two. And then you go to the reflecting. And a lot of the complaints about it not being formative, I think, are also related to the reflection portions are in mini essays in people's minds. They're not really about targeted, like, I should try this, this, and this, and then go do it. So I think we're still back to formative in nature cannot be completely taken away from the TPA itself, whether it's Ed TPA, Cal TPA, FAST. Once you agree that you've got some basic, ideas, planning, enacting, reflecting, then what is it really that's formative? Formative may mean learning to reteach. And it turns out some people may have a lot of trouble with that in 5 weeks, 2 weeks, 1 week. This is where I go back to the reason that it is a catch-all is not simply because it wants to fail people. There is that, and we have some good testimony coming the next couple of days about concerns about candidates who've been failed wrongly. But I do think we have to say the teaching enactment matters to get feedback on. That means submitting video, and that means finding out maybe you got to redo it. Does that not make sense what I'm saying? It's the way what you're saying, man. It's like you would have to redo the video because it turned out there was evidence you weren't engaging students. And now I'm on the negative side of why we have a summative versus a completely formative, even though I'm Mr. Formative. The summative is to say sometimes the video evidence does show this person is having a great deal of difficulty engaging students.
So, Brent, let me see if I'm understanding this correctly. So I think I get what you're saying. So see if this action fits what you're saying. So let's just say a candidate didn't do well on the video, right? Like you said, backs turned to the students, talking to themselves at the board, and they get a non-passing score, and they get a feedback that says, need dialogue with students, whatever all those things are. And that was the piece that they really scored really low. And had they gotten a better score, they would have passed the TPA, let's just say. Now, if we are redoing this and saying we're going to give an opportunity for feedback and resubmission, then if this was the feedback and the feedback would also give them an opportunity to resubmit, like they would resubmit a video, maybe not the same exact lesson, but the bottom line is the part of the video that was an issue was the fact that there was no dialogue, no interactions with the students. Then they would teach a lesson that shows that piece. Would that be good enough instead of having to redo the reflection, redo the planning, redo the lesson plan, but just
That's a
option right now.
It's not a current option.
It's
but
not
for
a current
chunk,
It would be a recommendation. I mean, that's.
For Ed TPA it is.
Oh,
If you can select the tasks that you want to redo, and if you get feedback that says your your implementation isn't good, you redo that.
That's how
Yes.
FAST works too. You redo the section that you failed or sections.
so on a different lesson plan, I think is what she's saying. Like,
Yeah,
Yes.
and maybe.
okay, because
It's not
Cal
just redoing
TPA,
video.
Cal TPA can't.
Yeah, I didn't think so. And that's, I'm like that world too. So the other thing that's interesting, I love that summary. I think this goes back to tomorrow. Chunking, tasking, deciding what matters. It might be that you can allow certain things to happen because you've got enough planning evidence, you've got enough reflecting evidence, but you're a little bit worried about your enactment evidence. So you could say, why not allow people to have an opportunity to reteach that? Now, let's take another case. This case that's in our study book today is a student who was so overwhelmed by the writing tasks that they essentially dropped out. They just said, this is a writing exam and I can't participate. I can't do it. I'm out. It's the case from a letter from, was it a faculty member, I think, at a school, advocating for their student. That is something that's more hard to surmount for recommendations for formative. In other words, is writing necessary in order to be more formative in nature? Do we have to have candidates in the habit of reflecting through writing on improving practice? And right now, the design of a TPA says yes. You gotta see the writing to show evidence of reflection.
That was somewhere though. Somebody, I remember. it was-
Conversations about that.
It was in the survey or the Google.
Yeah, I think that's falling into two.
Because you can have people rewriting their written
Talking about
responses, you can
multiple
give formative
modalities.
Yeah.
support to that. Do a better job of writing the following 3 things on this prompt. Well, I thought it was like the AI Hail Mary pass, like we'll have AI do that work for the feedback to help people write better.
Yeah, I find it
In this
interesting that
section.
AI landed here.
Yeah, but I mean, I think
know,
that's what it
did
is
too.
though. I
There's
think
3 or 4
it's
things.
Getting
that
people
was
to write
interesting.
better and easier writing.
Well, and I know Pearson uses an AI checker because I've been in a Zoom where they're calling out as someone who's like, I got this condition code. And the guy's like, oh, that means it was plagiarized or that an AI wrote it.
Right.
And like the candidate was like, what? And not understanding. So, but they have an AI checker that they are already utilizing.
So I'm just looking at our task, it says 0.5.4 down at the bottom, embed AI generative tools, limit AI but the point is, you're just saying like, right now, that's condition code land for a TPA.
Yes.
I don't know, what, is it for Cal TPA too?
Cal TPA.
As well, okay. So we've got these mixed purposes.
So my brain is really
Sorry.
No.
Off topic.
so many great ideas and so many interesting thoughts, but going back to the fact that we're looking at formative, right?
Right.
And right now, pie in the sky, we could change the tool, we could change everything, right? So I'm trying not to feel restricted by Cal TPA and TPA fast, right?
Yeah.
That we could think bigger than that. I'm nervous about chunking it into 5 different pieces that we get feedback, but to me, that does make it more formative because the feedback is informing the next step, right?
Why
So
does
it's
it have to
more
be
often-
something submitted? Why can't one thing be submitted and the rest gets put into, what's the word, embedded into,
Coursework.
yeah.
Well, I think all of it should be embedded.
Yeah, but right now, see, everything that's embedded is happening pre-submission, and
Yes.
then you get your scores, and then boom, you hope for the best. And there's no supports, there's no
Mhm.
resources for,
Right.
and that's, I think, there's 2 things in here that are talking about post-submission stuff. I don't think the formative has to be all offloaded to Pearson or to,
Mhm.
Or the local scoring.
Faculty?
right,
Yeah.
okay, to the faculty. I think, well, I mean, it still would be the faculty.
Yeah, exactly. That's my point.
Right. But I mean, I guess, I think you can still do the chunking of things and just have it be more localized, for want of a better way to describe it.
But we were invited to brainstorm still a tiny bit and also to zoom out because really these recommendations are intersecting and potentially contradictory with Colin's stuff. I think they really do. Like there are things that are going to be here that are like, well, wait a second, how's that going to impact the other 3 areas we're not in? But I did want to say that this formative in nature thing cannot be a sales pitch to simply rewrap around existing instruments that have no real formative component because they're defined with condition codes currently that say if you use faculty advice for rewriting a portion of your TPA, if you use a coordinator from your institution to help you review and rewrite part of your submission, these are all either plagiarism or ethical violations or, AI is now the next panacea. The only way I see this getting formative without going that route of like capturing people who are not doing the right thing is to do what you said, Matt, which is to bring it back into the home institution and ask the question, why isn't every single assignment aligned? And when I was really in the professor land mentality, I was like, don't you colonize my curriculum with TPA. Don't you turn my assessment class into TPA prep. Now, I'm not in that world anymore. Now I'm like, yeah, do it. I want my assessment class to align with TPA. But there are going to be faculty who are just going to be like, what? And so the implementation theory of action is that suddenly faculty will embrace these instruments, these tools, these artifacts, and they're going to want to teach towards them. I think they should, but I'm not sure that's going to be an easy sell.
I'm also thinking about this a different way. So like when I think of the TPAs and the purpose again of the TPAs is I know we have this huge ed code, the purpose of TPAs, but like if I just break it down to simply the TPA is a form of a way to kind of like the bar for the lawyers, you know what I mean? It's a final summative assessment. Let's just call it what it is. It's summative, right? Like lawyers have to pass the bar, teachers have to pass some form of TPAs, right? I mean, we should have some standards in our profession. Also, it's a way to make institutions accountable. It is one way to look at all the institutes, right? And how well they're preparing their candidates. The issue, at least what I'm seeing, and again, I know there are other issues, but I'm seeing is, yes, we're doing those things with the TPA. We're giving a lot of value to it. But the problem is we see these letters of like people who can't pass, great teachers, you know, there's issues, there's all these things going on. But what I'm saying is, can we do it instead of on the front end, prepping and doing all these things to get the student? We still want to do those things. But once we get the initial score for the TPA, that score would be what we used for teachers. Like teachers want to pass the first time. We would like to think they want to pass the first time because no one wants to do all these extra things, right? And then that initial score is also the same score that we use to look at all the institutes, right? And to compare them and whatever data analysis we're doing with that initial score. But what I'm saying is after that initial score, now we have, it's what is it, 93, 95% passing rate. Now we have this 5%. Can we work with that 5% and look at the TPA as it is right now and allow the resubmission process to be gentler so that we don't have these big issues of people who've gone through 2 years of teaching programs and getting straight A's and then failing and not being teachers and then, you know, having to pay this amount of money and having to sub and all this drama that's happening with that 5%. I'm saying is I think if we look at it that way, like I just think allowing for that resubmission part to be, you know what I mean, that 5%, so that we can not discourage people from the teaching profession if this is what they've been working so hard for and it's just this one assessment that they're not passing.
So what you just described to me actually aligns with two of the themes.
Yep.
Because one of the things that was highlighted was the opportunities for revision and resubmission, as well as the focused / substantive feedback. So if the initial submission receives focused and substantive feedback, then the candidate knows what they need to do, and if the opportunity is there for that revision and resubmission.
Part of me thinks it'd be cool to use like one of these whiteboards or something. I started kind of drafting based off of, but something.
Markers.
I know, I see one right there. I just don't want to be the one writing.
Markers?
Not yet. No, we're good. So I got something that says
Get the marker again.
TPA provides timely, substantive, differentiated feedback, assessing key standards and allowing ease of revision and resubmission processes on key skills for candidates.
Okay, one more time.
I don't know that this is right. This is just something to like tweak, right? TPA provides timely, substantive, and differentiated feedback. Assessing key standards and allowing ease of revision and resubmission focused on key skills for candidates.
How is that? Okay, because I could see.
I know.
And say, we do that already.
So I was thinking that when I was writing it. So what we would need to do is put a time frame on what does timely mean.
There's some
Put a-
things that, need to be defined.
Yeah.
What is key standards?
Those are
what
all
types
the
of
themes.
skills?
Practices.
Those are the themes that I really saw in there that are not talking about platform or AI at this point. So that should capture pretty much everything, I think. But please double check and add.
I want to circle back to, this is really good. I want to circle back to Matt's, what I felt was this tension again, which is, because I think, Linda, you really stated what we try to do at Session State already. I mean, it's exactly what we do. So, and I don't think we don't do that well. I think we do quite well. Targeted, remediated support for people who are having struggles, particularly if we see a passing problem. We need the indicator from the commission to know that. We need to know there's an instrument that we can all say, yes, they're having a problem with that. But I would also say, when folks complain, hey, this is redundant. Hey, this is repetitive. Hey, I just did lesson planning in 4 classes. I did it from 4 perspectives. I have a whole load of portfolio material that could show my lesson planning and reflection skills from other coursework. Why am I having to worry about my one right scorer who's going to look at this lesson plan and say, yeah, you're on to the next piece? There is a sense too of we are always struggling between embedding and not feeling colonized, but also not pretending that we don't have this work going on. And there's evidence for students to submit. So we haven't played with what's the sweet spot between a little bit more institutional artifact evidence support that may have been coached and may be a part of the teaching cycles that are embedded in teacher education programs. I mean, we really are separating it out and saying we need a separate set of documentation rather than the documents that are already there. We even have evidence in some programs of video of people doing work. I worked with my candidates in the first week on video, regardless of TPA. Is a tool for reflection, right? Tool for reflection.
Yeah, our candidates all would.
But it's not standardized, right? It's not in some sense consensus based. It may not even target all the different standards in the TPE. So we're back to this problem. How do we allow them to do the things they're doing and not feel overwhelmed by repeating something at the end of the program? Can we bring more back into the programs, Matt? Can we actually argue for recommendations that put more of the work back into our programs? And then have that be submitted for scoring?
Brant, I like what you're saying, and I think that when you pay for the TPAs and the platform is open to upload documents, I'm just thinking this through. And I'm thinking Ed TPA because that was the last one I took. Because I'm thinking of my personal program. I did an online program at Alliant University, but they had their own platform that was supposed to mimic Ed TPA's platform. Right? So we had to upload our videos and do all the things that EdTPAs would have asked us to do, but on a whole different platform. And then when we did the EdTPA, then we had to learn EdTPA's platform, and it was supposed to be very similar. But again, that's duplicative, right? But
We're saying that everywhere.
yeah, everything is,
a
but
critique.
what would be so wrong if, let's say, instead of having a mimicking whatever platform, that we just opened up, like candidates pay for their TPs, the platform is opened for 6 months, and they're taking your class, they're filming videos, and they upload the video from your class into that platform.
That would be like a portfolio-based approach,
Yeah,
basically.
right.
it'd be like taking your
It's a
best practice.
portfolio, yeah. That's
Right.
all.
But that is.
It has to be standardized, it has to be rated reliability, there has to be validity evidence to
Yeah.
support the artifacts. That's part of again, what we're here to also acknowledge, there are these standards.
Right.
The bar exam, you can't just say, hey, I worked as an intern in summer and I did a legal brief.
Yeah.
That's my evidence for being you can do that with some conditioning, some support, even in Oregon. I mean, you have to have somebody say, is that really evidence? But I agree with you. I think we could be thinking more about portfolio-based mixes. What's the TPA standard and what's the mix that would be more local?
Well, and that goes to
More
the
local,
key
little bit of
standards point. That was
TPA.
the third point on the thing, right?
So were you just advocating for more access to the online submission?
I guess I'm just trying to think of ways to make it so that it's
More embedded
and
lesson.
more embedded, like really embedded. Like, what is so wrong with it being done as part of the program if it's truly embedded?
Like, I designed a really cool lesson plan. I feel really good about it. I'm gonna upload that for.
It's like as a teacher, I would have students write multiple essays in like an AP course and say, okay, you're gonna submit your number
That's
one
right.
essay to me and I will score that one into the grade book.
So
Is that authentic though?
But what is truly authentic? Because you think about teaching, we don't teach in isolation. Like, when you talk about coaching, like two students are coached, aren't we always coached? I mean, and in some classrooms, it's completely collaborative, so you're there with somebody else. So what is it truly to teach in isolation? Teaching is collaborative.
I guess I meant to
So-
see an idea all the way through. Like as a teacher, I don't teach just one lesson
Yeah.
and then drop it.
And you're done.
I gotta take this big idea and help my
And then
students
see it.
develop it over time.
Yeah.
It rarely happens in 50 minutes that a high school teacher has.
Right.
So I don't know if it'd be realistic to take one idea here, another idea here, that never really ever gets more than a partial understanding, and say that.
That is the theory of action behind the planning, enacting, reflecting, and then going back to re-implementing cycle, because it's the idea of you take one idea as a teacher in practice and you carry it through.
Okay,
But it's a
so,
big stressor.
yeah,
if You get condition code out.
Yeah.
A chunk of that.
but isn't that a cycle that we want our candidates to do multiple times over the course of a semester?
Yeah, and in our programs
In
too.
our programs?
Yeah, we already do it in our programs. Our program.
So thinking about what you said with your AP students, where you have them do that, is it something where they do that multiple times in their program and they upload it to a system or whatever, and then they say, at the end, they say, this was my best work and this is why, and that becomes.
I would also say, I think it's interesting because I don't think something can be both formative and not duplicative, because the whole
Yeah.
nature of formative is the process of what you guys all called out, right? Like learning, doing it, okay, give me feedback, let me do it again, right? Like, so I don't, that's what I meant when on day one, where I was like, the egg code is like contradicting itself. Like what we're doing is contradicting.
And how are we formative and summative?
Yeah, right.
I think is what you're saying, yeah.
Yeah.
So the good news is we come out of this meeting with having done some of the homework. We got the first step.
We got 30 more minutes.
We have
Okay.
30 more minutes,
Okay, good.
yeah. I guess I just want to go back and challenge this whole notion of formative though, because what I hear us all saying is there's not really a way to make it formative, so we're just going to accept it as summative. And the charge is to make it formative. And so I think we have to grapple with how do we make it formative? And I think we're getting to the parts of why it's hard, but that's our
But it's
job.
formative in nature, I think is what they keep saying, in nature, not necessarily truly formative, because it is summative. Right now, it is currently summative.
I know, but our charge is to
Define
find
Make
a
it-
way to make it
I don't
formative.
remember. I have definitions in my head.
I think we define formative in nature in that,
Yeah.
something like, what do we say? It has to be used more for formative than for summative.
Yes, like 51% to,
Or more, yeah.
yeah.
So it,
Determine that.
So I think.
it's an algorithm. We'll just-
I will solve it. ChatGPT.
ChatGPT.
Did you want to add more to that matter?
No, go ahead.
I think that one way to carry that concern through would be to ask, if we look at these recommendations and we pulled out the theme. Feedback we've used in almost pretty close to
Yeah.
half at least in categories. Okay, so feedback. So let's just use feedback. If we use that as the heuristic thing we pull through all these conversations, we have to be asking every time, in what way is the Cal TPA fast or at TPA formative during the cycle of instruction, during the program in which people are embedded, during the actual activities that professors and faculty are giving candidates to do with lesson planning or with designing rubrics or with looking at how you're posing questions and whether or not you're giving wait time to kids. I mean, there's lots of ways you could say that's what's formative, is what's in the program and whether or not it's embedded in the culture of the program. The natural outcome would then be that, yes, the TPA is formative because you had feedback built in and streaming across that system. And I think that's
What's checking for that?
so there's an auditing problem, there's a transfer problem, I do feedback by giving grades, you do feedback by giving comments. I mean, there's all that stuff that's gonna start happening. There's, hey, I can't keep giving feedback to every single one of these candidates for every class I teach, I mean, but if we were to take feedback, to me, that's an anchor to reality of making it more formative. That's what I'm throwing that out as an idea. There might be another way.
I'm wondering, I'm just throwing an idea out. If you take a passing score away,
Mhm.
so that's just a score, does that move it towards formative? Because then you're identifying the areas of weakness, that's going into your program plan, going into induction. So it's no longer a barrier, it's just informing you of what you need to do next. I don't know. Is there a way-
I think if you still have scores, you still have comparisons.
Yeah.
So it's not, if it's just feedback, then I think that would be great. But if I get a number and you get a number, despite this absence of a cut rate, I still am gonna be comparing with you and everyone else.
Yeah, but what about the actual credential? Like, at what point do you say, you get a number, everyone who gets a number gets a credential, and then
Well,
we
the
just
law
become better?
says, the law does not say you have to pass. The law says, or demonstrated in multiple other ways,
Right.
right?
Don't tell that to all the candidates on new programs that have been told they need to pass.
I know.
Yeah.
Oh, that's something I've never heard.
It was briefly
Jump in, Mary.
addressed.
Please.
So I think it's oblique, but I think 44320.2 actually does say that the commission sets a performance standard.
Standard.
And performance standard means at what level of performance must you, what level of performance is expected?
So one of
That's a score.
That's a score we're using.
That's how it
Okay.
is. But it also says that the TPA serves as one source of evidence regarding a recommendation.
Right.
Yeah. And the new statute says, directs the commission to adopt a secondary passing standard, which creates the space for that score to exist. And where it doesn't meet the commission's adopted performance standard, there's possibility of mitigating it based on program and using all of that to drive kind of next stage of proximal development in induction. But,
Right.
so, yeah.
Just to interject, 4:15 is the agreed upon reconvene time for public comment. And then 4A is going to be just kind of, it'll be the sheriff.
Great.
So our next step was after we give the general term.
So it's the RDI TPA work group recommends that. I gave like a sample
Right.
potential sentence that could be tweaked, changed, and added. And then the second sentence, not that I'm trying to jump ahead, but I want the whole nature of the scope.
Give us a sense of.
This recommendation is necessary because, and then you give a rationale or evidence as to why. And then the third sentence is implementation of this recommendation is intended to address this by, and you just relate it to the theory of action so that, because keep in mind the audience of this is the board on CTC, so we need to make sure we are highlighting how this has to do with the charge of what our work group is, so they can see that connection.
So it shouldn't be surprising to anybody, but I still think the word feedback is the overarching piece of the words timely, ongoing, developmentally focused feedback. I almost wonder if feedback isn't the real push. And underneath it is all the ways in which you might get there.
I agree, and I think though being as specific as we can about that feedback.
Yeah, when is it occurring?
Yeah, when is it coming?
How,
How is it occurring?
Yeah.
Which is why, like originally timely, what is that definition?
That's embedded.
That's
Substantive,
like-
what is that
That's-
definition? Differentiated.
Differentiate is another one you can say, but I guess I'm
But I
asking,
think it should be limited to that, and we should separate the rest of
That's
the
fine with
idea into a second recommendation.
Cool, done.
okay.
Okay.
We're just
The
thinking that
person
we
should
want to have
just
something that's
be-
kind of a like, this is what we think, if it's not showing up across the TPAs. And then we got to work out how to get
Yep.
recommendations from it, then it really isn't formative in nature beyond the word formative in nature.
Agreed.
All the subtlety of it is gonna be a problem, but it's at least an argument for that's the recommendation pathway. More feedback, less scores, less numbers. I don't need more numbers. I need more condition codes. Condition codes aren't gonna get me to better teaching as a candidate. Feedback's gonna get me to better teaching as a
Yes.
candidate.
What
But
am I missing?
but I still think then there's gotta be a requirement or an expectation that these TPA providers create more resources for
Yes.
the programs to help candidates do something with that feedback. It can't be left up to the programs themselves.
That's actually right here too on one of these, right?
I would even add to that and say, whatever they provide shouldn't be a 100-page document
Right,
that they ask the
but it
candidate.
also shouldn't be right now, all it is, what did they say on here? It's the induction document, I don't know.
ILP, individual learning plan.
And that one, if you submitted in December and got your scores back in December, there's a whole 6 months before you even submit that thing to your induction support
Right.
provider. And so there's no growth that's happening there, in other words. So and if it's, I just think it can't just be left all to the institution's devices to come up with these sorts of things. And I think it would also maybe be helpful if these TPA programs are thinking about what is going to be done with the feedback, that might maybe help them think through a little bit more about the type of feedback they're offering.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's
Some
what
of
I-
it is-
So program
I just
improvement.
added, so I separated out, EPA provides timely, substantive, and differentiated feedback, but then I have some questions. When, from whom, how is it utilized?
So
That's
when,
okay,
let's
though.
start with when.
So
Put it that-
rationale, theory of action, we've already got a theory of action. Candidate improvement doesn't happen without feedback. Program improvement, the gap between how much feedback are we offering candidates systematically, where are we giving them opportunities to grow, learn, change, what are we doing to document that? The theory of action is it's an improvement of the program, it's a theory of improvement of the actual candidate. It's a continuous improvement approach, but it's not using scores to improve, like, oh, we got a bunch of ones,
Right.
how do we improve?
Right.
It's what are we doing to support candidates in all the different dimensions, and then what's the feedback? And again, I go back to feedback would require some thinking about what's possible and what's not. Really, so how, when, why. It's not true that you're gonna be able to monitor every single program, and you don't want that. You want to incentivize them. So here's a thought. What if there was a score or an evaluation tool that allowed people to show their willingness to improve? Like, this is what we're working on to get better at. Because the whole theory behind PACT, when I remember that back in the day, it wasn't just to improve candidates and teachers. It was to help all of us as faculty.
And that's actually a
Get better.
question that I've had in my head. Formative for whom?
For whom?
Formative for the candidate, formative for the program.
For
Could be
faculty.
for both.
Yeah, exactly.
That's actually one of the,
I'm wondering, what if, okay, so what if instead of this all knowing cut score, what if it was if your score is this, then this? If your
Pathways.
score is this,
Like a roadmap.
then
Yeah.
this.
Isn't that what induction is supposed to do?
Well, that would be true for this tier, right? But for those other people who need more support, I mean, I think that's the whole point that we're trying to make about we need more substantive feedback so the people who aren't making it know what to do.
right.
Including faculty. I'm gonna put
Yes.
myself on the line here publicly. Because I'm gonna say faculty, my friend, you're a faculty member, I'm a faculty member. Some of us are absolutely engaged and understand what it means to license teachers. Some of us have no clue. I just said that out loud about what it takes to license teachers inside of teacher ed programs. So you're dealing with a faculty who may not even be interested in aligning with this instrument, but that's in part because they're not interested in aligning with California TPEs. And so we go back to the improvement problem is not just for candidates, I just said it. It may be also for faculty, not just admins and staff.
Is that what we're gonna get at when we start looking at accreditation pieces?
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's also one of the things I think that kind of makes this whole thing a challenge is we're talking about, it's not one purpose, right? It's not just candidate, it's also program. And it's not just, right?
And
There's like
program is
three
too
or four.
abstract. To me, that word is a way to get away from who runs programs.
'Cause
Faculty and staff run programs.
usually like what I would do in an administrative role is I'd say, okay, like what's the priority? But there is no priority. There's 4 priorities. And so when you're serving multiple masters, you're never gonna have something that's gonna serve any of them well. So that's really what my vantage point is, because you can't write one thing to do 4 things well. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So.
Matt, were you gonna say, sorry?
Well, I was gonna say, I like the pathways, but the one thing I would change is that I don't think if you're up high, then the pathway is your induction program, because this is a journey, not a destination, so it shouldn't be like I can check this box and hit the pause button until I get credentialed.
Yeah.
Only thing I was gonna say is, I'm not disagreeing with the formative for the different roles. It seems like the assumption with all of these recommendations is that we're at the student or the teacher candidate level,
Mhm.
for now anyways. And I don't know what the reason is for that. Maybe we're nudged that way or.
Because I think that's what brought us here in the first place.
Yeah.
It's a primary stakeholder. I mean, I think the student candidate who pays money and doesn't get a chance to join the profession, they are clearly the person we need to worry the most about. But I do think the theory of action was behind some of the initial TPA work. It's a collaborative in which we now can look at our teaching practices and our learning practices around the standards more carefully. And at least those programs that took it seriously that way, and I'm sure if Tina was in the room, she would agree that the early impressions of TPA were, let's look at program, let's look at how we teach teachers, and let's even understand better how the alignment isn't just in a course syllabus where we write the top of the course syllabus, TP 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but which particular artifacts in our class do we stand behind and say, this is evidence of our student candidates' planning abilities. Right? Like that was the idea, like to align things more. And that scared a lot of people because they felt, again, like they were being told to teach to the test. But I do think, in fairness to the commission and the TPA work, there's nothing wrong with having teacher ed programs, including at San Jose State, care a lot about planning skills, care a lot about reflecting skills, and care a lot about enactment skills. Those are things that are the work of teaching, as I understand it, as a teacher and as a teacher educator. So I'm just arguing for, I think, Matt, it is obviously been guided towards this candidate, but who was the first person touching the candidate? It is the faculty in the program. If you say it's the faculty, I'm gonna go faculty. I'm a teacher. We do a lot of work, a lot of lifting as teachers. Faculty, you are. Let's stand up for ourselves. We are the faculty working with our candidates who are called our student teachers. And we have to align. And sometimes we align really well. And sometimes where it's duplicative for us. Why am I teaching somebody to go through the cycle for TPA when they already demonstrated in my class? I mean, I'm pretty confident that some of my colleagues at my university could easily check a box and call it a certificate and say, we've taught people a lot. We need to put it through TPA again. But I do say we should put it through TPA if it's connected to other important standards that are outside of assessment. So I'm talking about my own field. I teach assessment, of course, on assessment, but that's not the only thing. There's multicultural, there's language learner courses, there's courses that are dealing with special education, there are courses that are dealing with, other lenses on practice.
What is the evidence those faculty are using to show that they have taught that and taught it well? Because I can tell you that I have faculty, I'll say it, this is an example from FAST. Lots of our candidates struggle with writing clear learning outcomes. When we go to the faculty who teach the courses where that's addressed, I don't understand. We teach that, we get that. Well, okay, but look at what the scores show.
I would also say, like, if you look at assessment, and I'm not saying assessment's rolled out properly in any state, but like, think about like what we do with our students, the CASP, right? Or CAST or whatever. There's the end goal assessment, it's summative, it's very similar, like TPA is structured very similarly. Here's a massive turn in, you're assessing all the standards at once. Here we go, right? At my vantage point is that assessment, while we use it to look at scoring schools, the faculty are not the people that is for the students. And in that type of regard, that's how I view this. This is meant to be for our candidates, the TPA. Right, but they got to be the primary stakeholder looking for it.
Well, we have about 12 minutes before we go back.
And I still think it's
So read our one statement that we've made.
Yeah.
If you ask me the priority list, these have to be the number one thing on our mind. And then we'll judge schools on how they do, just like we do for the CAS.
But again, rather than judge, how about if we formatively engage?
Sure.
People doing the work.
Continuous improvement.
It is improvement, not just looking at that's the problem with candidate. I got nothing to do with that. I mean, like, hello, we're in a community of practice, like, but I think I got your point. I just want to say, let's
It's the
keep
same thing.
holding out hope.
It's just.
So Matt, you want us to?
No, sorry, I was gonna go back to the our statement, thank you. I don't know what we have.
Well, we talked about separating it out, but I wasn't clear on how to separate it. So I have, what I pulled was the RDI TPA work group recommends that the TPAs provide timely, substantive, and differentiated feedback.
We gotta define,
Yeah, none of that's not a clear enough recommendation.
Exactly. We also had the part about assessing key standards and allowing easy revision and resubmission focused on key skills for candidates.
So let's just start with, why is that not enough?
Well, what does timely mean?
So I could say right now it's timely feedback.
3 weeks.
By this meeting, do we need to really have that?
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
No.
Have a draft.
How is that, I guess, how is that any different from what's already happening?
Yes.
We have to
I think, yes.
say that what's
Well-
happening isn't this,
Right.
or
It already says timely, I think, to your point, in what it says in the original egg code, and that is what it's operating under. Is broad language like that.
So you sure that if I read the manual and I go in and get scored, I got timely feedback because within 2 weeks, a Pearson scorer told me that this was my score? That's not timely feedback. Timely feedback was from the beginning of the program. It was the middle of the program. It was the artifacts and activities building up to the TPA event. It was the things we did in this class and that class and that class. That's the timely feedback, but I guess we can't control that, right? We don't know what people really do.
Yeah.
So we're back to the summative instrument is the only evidence we have of teacher anything. We're back to the same problem. We're circling right back. We have to use one evidence body.
I don't, we're not excluding that feedback. We're just making a recommendation for this part of this bigger feedback
Yeah.
picture,
There's a big picture happening.
Which is,
there's lots of feedback that's going on, to your point. I think it's happening from the first day, and that feedback happens verbally, it happens in written comments, it happens in nonverbal things. But eventually they gotta submit this thing, and they're getting feedback there too. And that's the recommendation that we're specifically talking to in this big picture of feedback. Let's just talk about the feedback that they're receiving from TPA.
so in Cal TPA, they get 2 sets of feedback. They get cycle 1 feedback and they get cycle 2
and
feedback.
it's a score.
Yeah.
It's a score on a rubric where they have some qualifications within the rubric.
And in
It's
TPA,
just
by the
not
way,
specific
don't
to
they just put it all in at
Yes.
once? They just put it at once, right? There's no 2 parts.
Correct.
Right.
Okay,
It's
and
all one.
fast, is it 2 parts? It's 2 parts as
Get
well.
a score and it's not very.
It's
So
just a score.
feedback-
So this is specifically
Prior.
saying that it should be more than a score.
And prior to the submission.
Well, no, this would be after the submission, is what this is
So-
talking about.
So I don't know about
What is formative in nature?
FAST and Cal TPA. If Ed TPA, it seems like the feedback is more of a justification for the score.
Yes.
Yes.
Rather than feedback that's offering some guidance that would move the learning forward.
Correct.
So maybe that's what we talk about with the feedback.
So feedback that moves the learning forward prior
Feedback that's not just a
to submission.
no, post submission, when they get this thing back, we're talking, so that is happening in the big picture of feedback.
If they come back to the event,
Right.
rather just give a score, give next steps, like could you say, give clear, actionable next steps for this candidate to improve and then go back and resubmit?
Sure.
And that clear
Or-
and
or-
actionable.
I don't
They
know,
may not even
I'm
need
not
to
suggesting a resubmit, because
Okay.
that might be where the other resources come in that are provided by these TPAs, where they're saying, now that your candidate has gotten this feedback back, here's what you can, IHE do to, support the use of this to improve their learning. Okay. And it could be, it could
So
be,
Pearson could say, look, the grain size currently of our feedback is, we have a justification for the score. It's based on the rubric. We quote the language. We literally cut and paste it, drop it in there and say, that's why you got a 2.
sounds like it's a checkbox. and-
Checkbox, and we want something that's pushing the envelope to more what?
Differentiated or that's what, exactly.
I don't know if that's differentiated, though. We're talking.
No,
about-
I know, we need to be pushing the envelope that way, though.
So I just
I
added,
agree.
I don't know, do we want to
Also-
keep in the timely, substantive and differentiated feedback that guides the candidate's ongoing growth
Specific.
and development? And have a bullet under that, clear and actionable next steps.
I think you, I mean.
This is hard.
Yeah.
I don't, I think for me, there are maybe 2 things there, the timely, but we need to be more specific and not say timely, say within 3 weeks' time. Something that is very explicit,
After submission or before submission?
after submission deadline.
So we're back to
You say 3
post hoc.
I said 3 weeks, but
Yeah.
yeah. I'm not,
You're not being pie in the sky.
I am not, I guess I'm just trying to narrow the focus.
Yeah.
And I understand that there is feedback that's happening as part of the embeddedness of the TPA. I guess for whatever reason, I'm focused now on submitting, getting feedback back from the scores.
And I think of that as revise and resubmit 2.0.
Yeah, but I don't know necessarily if the resubmit to Pearson has to happen. The resubmit can happen, as
Local.
yeah. Or,
Also-
or I can just be part of a class.
Focus area 2 is about a survey.
Provide teacher and faculty provide ongoing feedback prior to submission.
No, we're at the after, we're post right now.
We're
Well,
right.
I'm trying to back up to get to your.
So focus area,
Told us not to.
focus area 2 that we're hitting on tomorrow.
Because
But keep what you just said out
Yeah,
loud
that's
and
good.
move into a new one.
Yes.
And then let's finish this one and come
Yeah,
back to
yeah.
that.
Got it.
All right. Here's my concern about feedback and being substantial and differentiated and specific and all that good stuff is that it also has to be standardized. So like if, you know what I mean? And that's why we have that issue with they're just clicking on check boxes, but they kind of do. It's kind of like report cards now in LAUSD world, is that if we write our own comments, we have to be really careful because we're held liable to those comments of like, your kid sucks. You know what I mean? You can't write that. But now we have this massive 20-page document that says that's verbiage that has been approved by
You can
lawyers.
copy and paste which one of these most
Yes,
applies.
put it in there. But
Pearson would have that too.
Gosh.
that's what happened. That's already what's happening.
that's what I'm saying. It is currently what's
Can I
happening. That's
just-
why I'm saying it's gonna be hard to have it.
To standardize that feedback in a way that's not just
That's what we're
legalese,
saying.
not legalese.
Yeah, like what we're saying is we want more personalized feedback that makes the candidate better but
Well,
how
I
would they
think
be
it's
able to
more
do it?
so the candidate knows what to do
Right. But I'm
in their
saying-
resubmission or in their ILP plan. Because what the complaint that we're hearing over and over and over again is, I don't know what to do to make it better next time. I resubmit a second time, I fail again.
Right.
And then I do it a third time and I fail again because I don't really know what I needed to do to make it
Right, so
better.
that's what I'm saying is that
So
their
how do we
feedback
get-
bank needs to be bigger and more, it still has to be standardized, because they can't just be like,
Right.
you know,
You're right.
hi, Mandy. you
But
need to do
my fear is if we give that directive,
Right.
that it's gonna go from 18 rubrics to 44
Yeah.
rubrics, right? That, I'm just trying to think, if we send out, we want more standardized feedback, what we're gonna get is more rubrics.
Right.
And I don't think that's answering the problem.
We're still back to the problem, sorry,
Go ahead.
how do I do that?
You're okay.
Got me excited about the score.
We got 3 minutes. Good luck.
Matt, hang on, Matt, don't go
I'm
away.
talking to Juliet. I don't know.
Leave it, Juliet.
The scorer is gonna have to come up with this stuff we're talking about. So now we're back to who's the scorer?
They really have the
There are
authority.
recommendations to the scorer as well.
I know.
We're
So-
making recommendations to the scores, wherever they are, whoever they are.
You can also separate,
Well, if they're local and they know the person and they can give feedback because they've been working with them for 6 months.
Fast, that's the fast model,
Then
highly embedded to the program. So yes, they can do that, but what about all the others who use Cal TPA and Ed TPA who don't have a fast relationship like that tight? We would have to be the scores. We'd have to go back to the question of structural change.
yes,
There's local scoring, no more Pearson offloading.
yes.
Yes.
But we haven't
No
said
more
that today.
offloading to rubrics.
We haven't said that in our committee, have we? So 2 minutes left? Have we said, and no more local or non-local scoring?
But I think that,
Piece
That's the embedded piece tomorrow.
but I think it has to do with formative.
So too.
Because if it's local, then it is, there's more opportunity for formative. So I actually
For the
think. it
candidates
speaks to
and
this.
for
That is the theory of action for portfolio assessment.
Even when it was local, that we farmed out our.
Grad students.
No, because you're an assistant
I did it.
professor.
Sometimes, but sometimes it went farther down the
Really?
road to other.
Shared it with others.
Or I'm just imagining in the future, it's gonna be farmed out to, Chat GPT.
yeah, 100%, I could see that happening.
And how is that valuable?
It's not.
It's not, but that's if you're asking.
Then why are we doing this
Faculty.
assessment?
Oh, now we're really getting existential with a minute to go.
Well, I mean,
Because you could always just say no more, but then you're back to local programs doing whatever they do. And that is nice in theory,
What
but
is-
weird.
but
Strange.
what is different now than was before all of this happened is now we have TPEs. Now we have an accepted practice that we didn't have before, like a common language we didn't have.
Good point. So 20 years now up for, we've got more best practice ideas, we've
Yes.
got more sense of
that we
alignment.
didn't have before. So this assessment tool was created because we didn't have that,
We're supposed to pull that
but
through.
now we have it. So
Room, it's
the
also.
question is really, is that tool the right thing?
I,
Yeah.
You didn't ask me about that. I'm on a committee being asked to give guidance on how to make this better.
I know,
How to.
I know. I know.
But I think we made it somewhere. I think you gotta put a score in there though eventually tomorrow. We gotta say,
On.
the person who's doing the feedback has to be scored.
All right, all right. Am I supposed to email this to you? Cause good luck.
He's gonna have to pull the transcript from here.
Matt was, Matt, did we satisfy you today? I always want to satisfy you.
as far as like getting, no, we're not satisfied, but I don't know you had a lot of.
Sorry, I loved your question, Fred. Did I satisfy you, Matt?
It's a romance problem. Did I disappoint you again, my Matt?
Conversation just went a whole other direction.
I respect Matt knowing the burden he's describing, which is who's gonna do the work.
Exciting. We actually get a visual. This is great.
Oh, wait, hold on. I'm gonna have to get glasses.
Nice.
I know, that's what I always do, Linda, because I can't see distant, so I'm always like, shoot, I forgot my glasses.
Hold on.
Thank you so much too for those great notes yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Super helpful.
Oh, it was fantastic, Julia.
Hold it.
You're good at writing projects.
Really helpful.
So when are we starting?
We're unmuted, so technically everything's
No,
going.
you actually unmuted. You can start right now.
Okay.
It's already in recording mode, so.
Can I just share what my thinking was this morning at 3:30? So when I first looked at our notes, one of the main things I noticed is that a lot of the things, we didn't have anything written under implementation.
Yes.
We had it right. We had it all under recommendations as necessary because, but I think what we had written there actually belonged in implementation because we were talking about what it was gonna fix. What we didn't identify was what the problem is now, which I think is what goes in the middle. So that's what I tried to do is move those things down to the bottom
Yeah.
and identify the problem. I don't know if I did it well, but that's why I restructured it.
No, that
maybe.
makes sense.
That was helpful.
Like I'm looking at that, that makes sense, yeah.
But I also think one of the challenges for me is there's no research in any of this, right? So like.
Oh, there's not right now.
We're just making up like this matters because we said it mattered. That's good. That's
Well,
enough.
I mean, I
Sorry.
think we're basing it in the discussions that we've been having. I don't think it's coming out of nowhere.
And I
And the
think we can
discussions were
augment
based
it,
in research, but I think we can strengthen,
augment it later.
of course.
Yeah, we have a couple.
Her hand up, do I?
We're not
No, we're not
able
allowed to.
to engage with public.
Sorry, Kara.
We can, when we go back to the main room, we'll open for public comment. But in the breakout rooms, we cannot.
So that was really helpful, I think, to clarify number 2 task out of the subtasks. So what else did you want to say about?
Then the other thing, so I added at the end 5 and 6 based on some of the conversations that we were having yesterday and that we just didn't articulate.
Can you read that out loud or?
So I added candidates be able to submit their initial TPA or TPA resubmission when completed. So there not be windows,
What
So
do you
that it's-
mean by?
but I don't know how possible that is.
Well, I just don't understand what that,
Yeah, I don't.
can you clarify what that means?
Whenever you finish it, you turn it in.
Yeah, so like on a rolling basis.
So that
There's
you
no
get
hard
feedback
deadline.
as soon as possible so that you can redo the work during.
How's it
And here's the
different?
problem. That people aren't able to go and get jobs
Yeah, right.
because
Correct.
they get sent back into doing it again,
Yes, right.
right?
Mhm.
So if they were able to do it earlier in their program, whenever they had the skill set,
So can I talk about how we deal with that with FAST?
yeah.
Because we have it so linked to clinical practice. And because they get, the deadline is set up in such a way, and we work to get the scores back to them so quickly that if they don't pass, then they're given a tight window for revising and resubmitting. So very rarely does the semester end and the candidate hasn't.
But that isn't true for Cal TPA.
I know, it's
or TPA.
absolutely not true.
And the problem is that many of those candidates, from what I'm reading from surveys and other
Yeah.
things, is that they're putting off the TPA.
Yes, exactly. I
finishing their
think that's a
coursework,
problem.
Right.
And I think that's highly
have
problematic.
zero support.
Right.
Exactly.
And
it's
then they're
not
trying to do a
going
TPA at the end.
which
So
is-
the idea being if you have a rolling submission,
Well, what if we just require it to be part of clinical practice?
We can
Yes,
make that-
I agree, and I can say it's part of our clinical practice. So I'm teacher intern
Yeah,
program. Their clinical practice starts on day one and goes for 2
Absolutely.
years. And they prioritize, as I would hope teachers would do, their students first.
Yeah.
And then they prioritize their job, and then they prioritize, and then the TPA falls on their priority list. And we push them. We have times where we come together and talk about TPA. We do office hours of TPA privately. It's just not going to be the highest priority because there's always time until there's not time. And then they submit. So like our submission is due December for cycle 2. And right now I can say I've had
November.
3 out of 75 who have submitted.
Yeah.
And we are doing a lot of intervention for those others, and we have another meeting required for all the people who have not submitted actually on December 14th, because we want them to come in and let's submit together.
which
Ours
then
were already all due.
Yeah.
And they've already received scores.
Yeah.
Well, I was also.
Interns are also different than student teachers, I think. a
But
little
that
bit.
just to me feels like then it's not really embedded in the coursework. It's in addition to.
Yes. Well, keep in mind that it is in the coursework. Things like the annotations, I can tell you, are a little draining too, because they have to create a document for the annotations, make sure they save it, because any resubmits
Mhm.
has it takes a couple hours just to do those on their own. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right. Well, I was also gonna add, like, logistically, I think it'd be really hard, like, to just submit, get it back at this rolling. Because right now, as they have it, it's actually not bad. It's, if you look on, I'm looking at CalTPA and I looked at EdTPA, it's basically, there's a submission window every month.
Yeah.
So it's like, there's a date every single month. So
Yes.
if you missed one, you only have to wait 3 weeks before the next window opens. There's only one time period where I think it's during the holidays, where it might be a 5-week window before the next one opens, but it's pretty much monthly you can submit. I think when you submit it depends on you as the candidate and your program.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, but there's nothing that says you can't submit in February versus June.
Yeah.
So for a candidate that's waiting last minute, like, that's a choice that you made, really. Because I know the program I had, they were like, okay, this is your second year or your last 6 months, like, make sure you take the TPAs. Here's here's where they give you suggested points where where it would make sense for you to take it. But again, it's not as embedded as let's all do it at the state together
Right.
and we'll give you a grade.
Yeah, right. Because we can't see the platform, we can't see what's happening. So like our submission
But
date
if-
is technically 2 weeks
But
away.
our other recommendation was that it be done locally,
That-
right? So
yes.
there's not a place for it to go out and come back.
Put
Correct.
myself in that queue.
Yeah.
So I think there's a couple of challenges for this task today. One of them is to come up with a sufficient degree of specificity to sound like we're not just saying general
Yes.
problems.
Right.
The impossibility of that task is that we don't all share the same TPA. In fact, the whole state doesn't share the same TPA.
Correct.
And by the way, there may be new TPAs coming online. So it's not even clear to me that we could anticipate all the possibilities for new TPA any more than we could say, FAST does this, that's an N of 1. EdTPA does how many institutions? Do we even know how many institutions? 50% of the regular institutions left? I mean, again, there's a constraint problem. There's a certain number of programs.
Yep.
There's a certain number of TPAs for each of those programs. And we're trying to recommend, well, EdTPA, take this advice. CalTPA, take this advice. FAST, maybe not take this advice. I say that because even the idea of feedback is going to be tied to the timing of submission. If it's a 2-cycle program like CalTPA and FAST, then that makes sense to talk about feedback in a certain way. If it's a 1-cycle handed in at the end, that's going to be a very different set of recommendations. And I don't know that we can change people's program timing, their coordination efforts, what they believe they should be supporting students with. What I do think we could say is, for these 3 different models, these are the places where feedback could occur prior and post submission. Prior and post. So if I can just, again, slow it down, I'm trying to figure out, what would it even mean to say, give feedback? From whom? If it's coming from the scores, then that would mean when you are submitting the actual cycle documentation. And for CalTPA, that's 2 times. For EdTPA, that's 1 time. So how do we think
Well,
about
I'm
that
gonna
and
push
give a
back on
recommendation?
the way you're thinking a little bit.
Yeah.
Because remember, we are making recommendations, and I think we have information about each of the models as what's currently in practice, but each of these models is gonna have to go through revisions.
Yes.
Based on the recommendations that we're
Really?
making.
That's the whole
Yes,
point.
that's the whole point of the work we're doing.
You
So we need to
believe
think-
that the EdTP will be redesigned as an instrument as a result of our
It will have to be,
Yes.
or the CalTPA. or
Yeah.
whatever.
and fast. I think all of them are gonna have to go through redesign as a result of our work.
Yeah.
So I think we need to like move beyond the models. We have the models
Yeah.
as examples for what's in place right now,
No,
but we're trying to move forward to like some.
We're identifying what's wrong with the model
Models.
Yes.
and make it better. And they're
Yes.
gonna have to redesign to.
I am the minority position among the group, and gladly so. I'm happy to be in the minority on this one, because I was thinking our job is to give marginal little bits
No.
of,
Oh,
here's a little bit of advice for making EdTPA more formatively in
No.
nature. Which would
Remember-
mean give a
I mean,
little
yes.
feedback 2 weeks in advance.
back up
before
a
it's
minute.
due.
Think about where this came from. This came from legislation, proposed legislation that wanted to eliminate the TPA altogether.
Yeah.
And this group came to say, okay, no, we're not gonna axe it completely, but we're gonna redesign it to make it something that's more meaningful for the profession, usable,
Is
less duplicative, blah, blah, blah.
Step to recommendation 2,
Mhm.
it addresses feedback, and I think that's a good place for us to go, Brent, with what we're talking about and thinking about, because yesterday, what we had loosely discussed is that there's gonna be ongoing feedback, right? And we talked about that being the responsibility of 2. The professors the faculty that are working with them, but then also the TPA itself, which would be scored by those faculty,
Whoever those
right?
are, yeah.
So you're getting kind of 2 sources of feedback, and by adding,
To use the interim feedback and then the summative feedback.
Yeah, kind of an interim process.
yeah,
Okay, so Julia, going back to what you just said,
Mhm.
so is, because I guess I'm like Brian, not just on the same bandwagon, but I'm probably on a different field too. So we were created because they wanted to eliminate the TPAs,
Yes.
eliminate TPAs. So we're created, is eliminating TPAs off the table then?
I believe so.
Right. Like, are we
Maybe.
still even deciding on that? I'm just curious
No,
because,
that's not the charge of our workers.
that's not the.
okay, that's not the charge. So we are
Charge of our workers
revising,
is
or
to make
redesigning.
recommendations
Okay,
to the commission
right.
on how to
Fix it.
redesign the TPA.
To fix the TPA.
Okay.
And there's the idea of a small fix adjustment versus kind of a major overhaul. I mean, I think
And
of
I
what you're
think the
describing
charge
as
is
major overhaul rather than small tweak.
In ed code, what does the ed code state? That's why we spent that time going over it. And then what revisions can we make to
Right.
better align the instruments that we have with the ed code?
And one of the charges of the ed code is that it's formative, which is what we're
That's what we're
working on here.
grappling with. Yeah.
And then that means how many opportunities in our recommendation for feedback, not just how many, but the quality. So it's like quantity and quality. It's like
When and by whom.
when, by
all those
whom, all
questions.
those questions.
Yes.
So I think, so the recommendation so far, because
Yeah.
the second one oh no, the first one is feedback, you're right.
Yeah.
Substantive and differentiated feedback
Which-
includes clear and actionable stuff.
I know we're not doing priorities, but that'd be my number 1 priority.
Well, I mean, I think that's a solid statement, the way that it's
I do
said
too.
there. I know that we're not defining substantive and differentiated, but the next part saying that it has to be clear and actionable, I think helps to define it.
Yeah.
Wait, which one are we looking at? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So the recommendation number 1 is the
Okay.
TPA provides substantive and differentiated feedback that includes clear and actionable next steps within 2 weeks of submission.
I would like to add to that, 2 weeks of submission in order to resubmit and pass.
I think that's another recommendation that we have.
Yep.
Because if
Yeah.
you're saying 2 weeks within submission, okay, you got the you got the feedback, now what?
That's a
That's down
following one.
farther.
Okay,
And in terms of a theory,
TPAs allow candidates to use the feedback received to revise and resubmit individual sections that candidates failed as many times as necessary to achieve a passing
So
score.
notice it's only the sections that were failed instead of the full.
yes, thank you,
So
okay.
we
I mean, I
separated
can
that
move
into
this so
two.
that it comes right after that other one.
It's adding a sentence because it links it together, like what you.
Well, that's why I feel like they are separate though. And I think we maybe need to keep them separate, but I can put them next to each other so that they clearly build on one another.
Yeah, we
Sure.
could move recommendation 4 to 2.
Yeah.
I think it's important for it to be separate because underneath it, we need to explain why it's necessary, and I think they're necessary for 2 different reasons.
Yeah, I agree.
Right?
All right.
So one of the ways, again, to just drill a little forward, kind of think out our recommendations, imagining not only what we'd make, but the consequences of them, like what would be the hypotheticals that would come from this. So one good thing I think could be, this is 2 weeks for parts and those parts are remediated. It's almost like you're getting a pre-check. You're essentially, rather than getting a 1, you're getting an opportunity to find out. I think you're a 1 on this task. You might want to reconsider in the time that you have. Here are the concrete next things that you might try to do to improve it. If you take advantage of this feedback and utilize it, it may in fact put you in a position to bump the score.
Yeah.
Is that kind of the theory?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I would say
So-
that's actually what we do right now with FAST.
And I
Right,
think
but
in San Jose State and Cal TPA, we may not get the objectives, I use the word very carefully in quotes. The Pearson or the provider's score interpretation of the rubric. What we want to get is this is my question for us. The program's interpretation of the rubric before the external score, or if we go back to this idea of we're bringing it back to local scoring, we still got 2 issues. We got, somebody's got to make that call and say, here's the it's like a diagnostic. It becomes almost like a diagnostic assessment. We're diagnosing where you are now. You got 2 weeks to pull it into the next space. So I'm asking you, like, how do we deal with that? Do we just leave it open as we don't know who's giving the feedback? That's the who question.
I also-
So later in our recommendation,
Yeah, later.
we said it's gonna be locally scored,
Yeah.
and those professors would then be able to provide the feedback.
Yeah. So again, program moderated feedback.
Yes.
So that's one idea. And I would say, I don't
And
think we should-
program moderated scoring, both.
No, that's again, I'm willing to say yes to that, but I'm also willing to be a realist and say, I'm not sure that everyone's gonna move to local scoring. So here's my idea. At a minimum, we could say program moderated and TPA council, TPA something, because that
So that
could be,
there's like some statewide,
it could be. The point is, it just.
I don't know that
if
that's
the
what they're in
auditing.
charge right now.
Well, so, but how do we know that our charge is to kick it all back to local? I don't know how that got done.
There's,
Say that again.
How do we
It's in
get
the
from
law.
that side of the world? It's in the law
It's in
that.
the law that says that we need to consider local scoring.
Consider it, but that doesn't mean it's. a
I mean, everything in the work group is,
So I'm gonna say, I don't know that I believe that local scoring right now is a solution that would be accepted or used by every program. Some will still want to send it somewhere, even if it's in their own scoring community.
I was gonna add to that, Brent,
Please.
because I've had different conversations, maybe not in this
Yeah.
room with you guys, but with the different members. And from what I understand historically, when it was local scoring way back when.
Packed, yes.
And correct me if I'm wrong, because I wasn't around during that time. But it was a huge burden on the universities, and the universities chose to give it to grad students, or parcel it out to other companies, parcel it to other universities. And so hence Pearson, if I'm understanding correctly, was not created, but contracted because this was such a huge burden on the university. So I don't know if we're on the same page right now, Brent, but my understanding of what you said and what I'm thinking is that local scoring, I think, is beautiful. I think that if it's local scoring, it still has to be, I hate to use the word, but standardized. But like, it's kind of like when Devin said, I tried to get myself, hired as a grader because he wanted to understand the grading process. And in my program at Los Angeles Unified, we have our own intern program. 3 of our teacher advisors are also graders, right? Because, so like, I'm just thinking like, can we make it so that we're written in here that flexibility of, yes, we are going to allow local grading, but they must be certified at some level, right? So that it's calibrated, they're certified annually. It can be done, and it's up to the university to decide at this point, like, they can, maybe something along the
Or the
lines of like,
district.
or the district, whoever, the credentialing institute. Yeah, that it's local scoring with the option to send it off to Pearson. So like if the schooling is like, you know what, we know our candidates, we want to do 100%, then you do 100%, as long as
Moderated.
the 10 people that are scoring are certified scorers, right? But if it's a university that's like, look, we only have like 5 scoring people, it's overwhelming, we're gonna send 60% of ours out. Like, you know what I mean?
I understand what you're saying,
Just that
but I
option.
think that one of the things we've talked about is how much programs benefit when they engage in the local scoring process.
So can we say 50%? Like we recommend, like at least 50% of yours needs to be scored locally.
I'm gonna
Of your
push back a
candidates.
little bit.
Okay.
The reason that we're here in the first place is because we've stopped putting the candidates at the forefront. We're worrying about the institutions. The candidates are the reason we're here. This is failing candidates. And one of the main things those candidates have said over and over again is the people who are teaching me don't know it well enough to give me feedback to tell me how to do it. That's the problem.
That was sort of
And
my
so
point yesterday.
local scoring addresses the candidate's problem.
It forces the programs to take more responsibility.
Yeah, it
As
does.
opposed to putting the onus all on the candidates. Oh, the candidates aren't doing a good job.
I put it on the faculty. I was even more nasty yesterday. So I think I'm a faculty member. So I just want to say that I think one of the other purposes and challenges of the law, as well as the commission's litmus test for what counts as I'm going to use this bastard language, valid and reliable. Now, instruments are not valid and reliable. The scores that you use to make determinations about people can be more or less consistent, more or less meaningful, but the valid and reliable is sort of there, and inter-rater reliability has been a huge issue. It's an issue that basically was how do we calibrate and certify that people are scoring based on the levels that they should be. So we don't have too harsh of scores, we don't have too lenient of scores. That problem will replicate throughout the entire local scoring community if there's not actually moderation. And moderation is what's used in Australia to describe it. So to certify, they essentially sample universities kind of like an auditor.
Right.
And they take a look every other year, kind of like
That would be part of accreditation.
Exactly, and you basically get audited for a certain portion of what you're doing, but you don't have to do it every year, and you don't have to do it with every student. So there has to be some implicit notion that there's rater reliability built in, because that is in the law. When we say some TPAs are better than others, what we're basically saying is some have gone through that rigorous process. So again, we make the feedback connection, but we've got to remember that whoever is giving it, that feedback does need to be certified and calibrated. And it might be audited at local levels. But I also think, are we in a position to tell through our recommendations, the state, that every institution must use a local scoring mechanism? We can.
Yes.
See, I'm feeling more like Linda's concerned. I don't know that everyone wants to do that or will do it or can do it.
It's but again, I think
I'm
we're
thinking
here
about
for
the
the
stakeholders.
candidate.
Right,
Yeah,
but
candidate
We're
focus.
here for the candidate. The
Here for the
CTC
candidate.
is here for the candidates.
Okay.
it is, but I also think that there's a reality. There's a,
Mhm.
you know what I
Yeah,
mean? That we have
for
to,
sure.
I mean, like, if it's for the candidates, why not pass it out like candy? Good, everyone gets a, you know what I mean? I'm not trying to be sarcastic, but I'm just saying that, like, yes, we're here for the candidates, but there's also like a level of reality, and I would love it to be completely local scoring. I mean, ideally, that is it, but I'm just saying, based on what the conversations I've heard with the logistically what's happened in the past and how it came to be where we're here now, I just don't want to negate and go back to, you know what I mean? And now we're gonna have a working group 5 years from now, because guess what? Local scoring isn't working out. Everyone's falling apart. We don't have the money. We don't have the funding. You know what I mean? And now, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like there's gotta be options,
So-
right? In the same way that TPA has 3 options, right? There's 2 forms of TPAs, 3 options.
I think if local scoring's not possible because programs can't do it, then this assessment shouldn't exist. If you can't carry out the assessment, why is it here? Why are we doing it in the first place? The people who are tasked with teaching them how to become a teacher are the people in the room, not an arbitrary test on the side. Those people have to live, breathe, and know how to teach them
And
To
know what
the
their candidates
standard.
are doing.
and know what they're doing. Because no one should pay $50,000, go through all of their coursework, and then, like the person talking yesterday, has taken it 3 times and is now just quitting and being a long-term sub, even though the school site says it's one of the best teachers they've ever seen, because they can't pass a test, but their program passed them.
But then that's when we go into
To me,
that.
that's
yeah.
a colossal problem that we have.
It is, but that's what I'm saying is that it is a costly problem, but now we're going into accreditation, like now we're opening up that can of worms, which.
Yeah,
Which is our
that's a
next.
huge
that's our
part,
next place.
another
Yeah.
huge task that we have ahead of us. But I don't think we should not put a recommendation out because it might be hard.
Yeah.
Because right now, the TPA is really hard on 30,000 candidates.
And ultimately as well, these are recommendations. It doesn't.
Oh, yeah, the
mean
CTC
that the
may or may
commission
not.
is going to
Yeah.
Take them up.
Absolutely.
Can we look at number 2?
Yes.
I like number 1, how it sits. So I had a question about number 2. I'm gonna
Question about this too.
I'm gonna go to my time as a teacher, and I love project-based learning. Project-based learning is how students learn very well in my classroom.
Yeah,
They did it,
all the
they
time.
built it, they got feedback throughout the projects. When I read number 2, and then when I take a step back and think about the TPA is a project-based learning project. It is something they are doing, and then
Done well.
and in project-based learning, the reason it works is they are getting feedback at their level on the project. Now, here's the thing. Everything from the TPA, we have them do in our program duplicatively, where they're doing like, okay, we're gonna give you feedback on your learning target in our coaching. Oh, we're gonna give you feedback on your lesson intro and kind of explain all that. We're gonna have you do this lesson plan template that's massive because it mirrors the TPA's lesson plan template. And so we're gonna, right? Like that's
Yeah.
the honest truth of how it rolls. So in answer to your question about it's embedded, it's just they have to do it again, right?
Yeah.
So because we need to give them feedback.
Yeah.
So then the thing becomes, by the way, the due date wasn't for 5 more weeks, so I figured that part out. That was on me. But the thing for this is, if I take a step back and if we have a magic wand, if this is project-based learning, I would like to give feedback on the candidate because if it's performance-based,
Yes.
they should be able to take that feedback and perform.
Yes.
And that's what happens in project-based learning. And so if it was local scoring, and I know that's coming up as a different recommendation in a second, why would faculty, coaches
Not give
not
feedback.
give feedback to people on the project that they're working on
Absolutely.
and allow them to adjust and see if the adjustment changes?
Because the expert should be the one doing that in the moment
Right.
with the candidate.
Because if it's a summative, like all project-based learnings are summative evals, like all of them are always summative. And you always give feedback along the way to improve because they have to make the adjustment and play it out.
Well, and again, the most simple way to think about that is drafting.
Yeah,
That was,
it's drafting.
First draft, there's a second draft of the project, and the
I'm thinking about writing, right? That's my area of expertise. And so we know the research has demonstrated that best practices in writing instruction is that students receive iterative feedback throughout the process,
Yes.
right? To guide their learning. And then their ultimate final draft is what gets scored.
So is that what that's saying though? Is what my
No,
question
that's
was?
not what this is saying.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
So can I, Ben, are you good?
Well, okay, yeah.
Do it?
Go.
Sure. So I think going back to this challenge of what was the TPA designed to measure? Because remember, a lot of these discussions go into the nuts and bolts and the weeds really quickly. And they forget, well, what was the whole principle of what design is going on? So Ben, what I'm struggling with is, while I'm using the term project-based learning like you are, I think, and I'm also agreeing, everything you've said is like in my wheelhouse. The challenge remains, what are the targets of inference that say this is a safe beginner and someone's ready to teach? What is the thing that we're saying is the basic standard
Right.
to get through the hoop?
Yes.
And generally, the way that's been laid out is, yes, this is what I said yesterday, alignment with these different standards and
Right.
being able to show you can meet a level 1 or 2 on those standards,
Yeah.
designed as rubrics.
Yeah.
But the other thing I think that's been missed, which is very sad, is that planning, enacting, reflecting cycle, which in any project-based learning might be another set of skills. It might be the skills are showing that you can learn from planning mistakes, showing that you're capable of recovering the fact that your lesson plan didn't do what you thought it was going to do. That's a reflective disposition, that's a metacognitive disposition, that's a certain set of ways to think about what candidates are being asked to be. Be contingency thinkers, be creative, be able to make change on the fly, be open to feedback.
Right.
Betting this
Okay.
we're embedding this without thinking about what is the real thing we want to measure. We haven't even asked that question. Is it just standards alignment?
So I know for a fact, one of the areas of focus, I think it's focus area 3 or 4, is appropriate to beginning teachers.
Yes.
And to me, that is where we're going
What's
to
the
dive.
target of inference? We're begging the question. It's not
Yes.
just appropriate, it's not just rubrics. It's what's the thing that we believe a person knows how
I
to
think,
do?
I think we are going to actually say that when we get to that focus area of like, that's what my plan is.
We are, or all the other groups are, or
Everyone is.
All
we
together.
will come back to what was the point of
What are-
certifying someone is ready to teach because they have the following.
What are the
skills,
standards for
following
preliminary
knowledge, but it
credentials?
isn't just alignment with TPEs,
Yes.
it's something deeper than that. It's the
Yes.
ability to iterate, to change, to grow, to move.
So Ben, going back to what you were saying,
Yeah.
let's put ideal world. If Ben could create TPAs based on project-based learning, what would it look like? I'm trying to understand what you're trying to get at.
So project-based learning is usually you got a massive unit, which is what the TPE.
No, like, do you use it as TPA? If you get to design TPA
Yeah.
project-based style, tell me what would it look like?
Everything is truly embedded in the program, meaning they're actually doing the TPA and receiving feedback on the TPA in their coursework and their coaching and their fieldwork.
Start out with learning
Which-
objectives.
Can I show you my
Unit,
thing that I put in?
out into the field and practice it, come back.
The duplicative.
Here's mine. It's gonna come up in our work groups later that I suggested. Each TPA task should be broken into smaller parts. The parts could be assignments completed as part of required coursework. Candidates would receive feedback on the submitted assignments.
Yep.
I didn't say yeah, but they would then have the opportunity to A, revise the assignment based on the feedback, B, provide a written or oral documentation
And
of the
add some-
revised assignment, because I think that's an important piece,
Yep.
and then submit the revision as part of the official TPA submission.
Yeah.
So was it similar to what I said yesterday when I said, instead of doing it like if the TPA,
Two separate.
am I thinking of it correctly? Because when I said yesterday, like if the TPA was just an open whatever, you're doing it in class rather than waiting to the end to submit. You've gotten all these things. Okay, I took your class, you gave me the feedback, I recorded, I wrote my lesson plan. We did everything. Okay, it's great. Now upload to the TPA website.
Yes. That is what it was.
That was the portfolio.
Okay,
You got your
that's,
feedback and made adjustments and
Everything,
changes.
yes.
Yes.
So
That's what I
So
was
it's like
trying to suggest.
so that's, so.
By a faculty member.
Yes.
Okay, so, because I like that. That's what I'm, yes, I like
Yes.
it's like an open portfolio
It's a
idea.
portfolio,
It's a
digital portfolio. So here's again, I'm gonna hold on to some,
Okay.
keep fighting for it, because that's
Right.
actually, I can point to the document where it is in the current existing theory of the construct. What are things we believe we're measuring?
Okay.
But before I go to that.
TPEs, right? That's what it is.
Yes and no, because it's
He's
also
talking
the
about,
cycle.
No, I.
It's like-
Planning,
No,
enacting.
I get what you're
You Look
saying.
at your own Cal TPA handbook,
I
you
know.
open up, there's a
I
freaking,
know.
like it's there.
Plan, act, monitor, do, or just, or.
Because that's the theory of how a person grows and learns in the project-based context. But I want to talk about that. I want to go with Linda. What's my ideal TPA?
Mhm.
Which would be
Yes.
the portfolio method, which would be uploading your set of documentation. My challenge is that, as far as I understand, only 2 of our CSU programs offer a standalone assessment course. I teach one of them. Someone says there's another one down in Long Beach.
I used to teach it at Laverne.
Laverne has it, so now I said in the CSU. So
Yeah,
so
no, I
let's
know.
say CSU out of 23 campuses has less than surely 5 campuses that are using standalone assessment. Maybe there's a couple privates that do it, maybe there's a couple districts that do it, but here's the thing. If I had my way, I'd say everybody in the state has to design a task. They have to design a feedback protocol, which would include what we call progress guides. Those would be aligned with rubrics because rubrics are a larger view of the overall unit, but the actual progress guide targets a task and giving feedback to students in a 3-day cycle.
Yep.
Like, we have all sorts of ways we understand what assessment for learning is and we do it well. And we get a portfolio right now that literally they could upload. But that's like me privileging 5 programs.
Fresno State actually has in the multiple subject program, it has a 3-course series called Inquiry/Puzzles of Practice.
Yeah.
That guides candidates through the cycles you're talking about.
But assessment, formative feedback. Again, I was just describing.
Think about data, all the data you can collect.
I was
Think about student learning,
describing the
who
structure of a course,
We
and I
have
was
a
saying,
course for that too.
okay, so it turns out a lot of people could handle this. They could say, there's an assessment component to the task set. Design a rubric, design a progress guide, design a task that aligns with it, design feedback protocols, how you're gonna interact. Well, you could put all those up, but then you might say, wait a second, the state looks at that and says, well, that's different than this program's idea about what assessment for learning
Right.
is, standard 5. And so how do you deal again with that variation where there's no agreement on, well, a 3-point rubric is different than a 7-point? I'll give one just last thought. When I looked at the Ed TPA and to some extent Cal TPA impact on my class, one of the first things I noticed was after I taught people how to design appropriately research-based rubrics, they said, that's not the kind for the template in the Cal TPA. And I almost hit the roof. When I taught them how to create progress guides linked to rubrics, cutting edge research, they said, that's not in the Cal TPA. You don't need to give a progress guide. In fact, there's no language for it. That's what scares me. Because now what we're seeing is the TPAs, no matter how we articulate them, become checklists or they become templates
They kind of are right now.
right now. So I would love to break that mold
Yeah, me too.
with the portfolios that allow you to put up these artifacts, but then how do you agree that this person
Standardize the
is
grading.
competent to know what a rubric is, what a progress guide is, what a formative feedback protocol looks like for kids?
But I also think if you look back, I don't know, when did the TPA start? How long ago?
2008.
Okay,
Yeah, packed,
so
yeah,
if you look back 15, 16 years,
online.
if you look back, the whole idea of what happened with the TPA is it was the instrument that changed the institution's
Mhm.
approach.
Yes.
So what you're talking about, I hear and understand, but like I also think the work we put into this will create, has the potential to generate the change at an institutional level and create norms. Cause like what came out of this, you had TPEs, you have all these things, some standardization on how we approach instruction for new teachers. So, right, that's what came out of the TPA. And so to that point, I think not that it should be this way, but I think the TPA becomes a mechanism of change at the institutional level for how we approach things.
So again, let 1,000 flowers bloom because at least they're blooming with feedback.
Yes.
It doesn't matter how the
Yeah,
feedback
at
is
least.
necessarily being defined, but they're trying it now in a way
Yes.
they never
And
tried
it
it.
might take time. It won't be
I
instantaneous.
I
but over
appreciate that
time-
theory.
Yeah.
That's loose and it's loose coupling. It makes sense for all of us to have autonomy.
Yeah.
But the point is stay on the feedback mantra. Where
Yes.
is the feedback?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we have multiple,
Okay.
because we are
Let's do it.
back in the other room in 4 minutes.
Yeah, we sure are. And I think we need to really, I think we kind of have agreement on 1 and 2.
Yep.
Don't we?
Yeah.
Um,
But then I
I'm
think
concerned about 5 and 6.
Okay, so let's find out a 5
Because
and
I
6.
don't think we have consensus on 5 and 6. We are so close.
But
You're so proud of us.
So 5 and 6, let's look at it.
for.
We want to remove the brackets.
Let's
on
just look at 5 and 6 real quickly because
Yeah.
Maggie's saying they matter.
Yeah, I don't think we need the bracket. I think it
I
is
agree.
TPA.
Yeah, okay.
So, and that is the one I was talking about when I was
Yeah.
mentioning the feedback isn't on the actual assessment, because that's what it should be.
So I think 5 is the one we don't have agreement on
Okay.
because we're talking about how difficult it would be for them to submit whenever. But 6, we have not talked about at all. So I just wanted to share my thought process with 6. So yesterday, we were talking about those people that don't pass, right? And it's a very small percentage of people. But again, those people have paid $50,000 for a program.
Right.
And they've turned assignments in that have clearly passed. So I'm just wondering, we already have a mechanism for the secondary pass rate. If instead of that being a cut, if the secondary pass rate included everyone, and then it went back to the institution to demonstrate proficiency, we already have all that mechanism in place. Would that not reduce the high stakes component of it? Because then you can go back and your faculty can help you.
But I'm also wondering if we're saying that they can resubmit based on their feedback as many times as necessary.
Yeah.
Right, then it kind of negates that last.
Is
Then
that,
do we
is this
need
even
that?
needed?
No, it would
And
be
it-
an
and they're
alternative,
Only
right?
submitting the portions that.
Right.
The portions
So
that they.
can we write a note like under number 6 and just say, based on our recommendation in number 2, was it number 2?
This may not be needed.
This may not be
Put it
needed.
in italics.
Yes, you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Are you okay with that, Mandy?
Yeah, oh, totally.